بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. In the previous chapter, we had talked about success, right? We were still within all of Raghib al-Asfahani's division of blessings, right? Can we recall what were the categories of blessings? There were 5 of them, and we completed them basically last class. Today he's going to talk about the relationship between some of them. He said blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were not able to be counted. They're unfathomable, but they do fall into certain categories. Body, afterlife, very good. Those are 2. Afterlife being the highest one. There was one in between body and afterlife. He had them in a hierarchy. Wealth was part of external blessings. Good. So that's there too. That's 3 out of 5. What's his whole shtick in this book to get us to do? Develop our virtue, right? So blessings of the soul. Yes, very good. Yes, those are the internal blessings. Good. And then the last category, which we had talked about last class, was everything related to success. And we dwelt on how, you could have all of the correct things being done on your part, but if Allah wills to not make it successful or bring about the results, then He's not going to do it. We talked about that also in the khutbah this week, about how part of Allah's da'wah, His invitation to us, is to free ourselves from fixating on the means. Even though He created cause and effect, He created certain knowable means to avail ourselves of, we also cannot commit our heart to fixating on those means. Some of the examples we had brought up were that the person who's sick, the doctor can't save you except by the will of Allah. All the doctors in the world get together and Allah wills that it's just not going to happen, then sorry, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get better. And the opposite is true. Haven't there been doctors that have said, you've got 2 months to live, you've got 1 week to live? Everybody says the prognosis is scary. And then Allah, we found, has willed something else, right? That's not to spurn or minimize the involvement of the doctors and the usefulness of doctors, of course not, medicine, etc. However, we cannot become fixated and dependent on those things, because at the end of the day, they are a means that Allah has created, and Allah is in control of all of those means. Allah can make them and their techniques and their knowledge and their treatment hit the mark, or He can choose to not allow it to do anything. The person who's afflicted by whisperings, evil suggestions, perhaps even magic, evil eye. It's not the reciter that saves you. It's not the Raghib that saves you. It's Allah that saves you, if He wills. And ruqya and these things, they are a means that Allah has created, completely permissible. But we can't get fixated on them. Some people, they act as if their salvation is in the hands of the reciter. And we have seen how this can lead to manipulation. Right? No created being deserves that kind of power, trust, and influence, because at the end of the day, it's up to Allah whether things come about or end as we want to or not. So this is sort of the thing that we were talking about last week when it came to what's the relationship between the inputs and the outputs, our effort that we put forth and the results that we're seeking for, right? Every step of the way, it depends upon Allah's blessing and His tawfiq, right? His willingness to make those actions and inputs line up with the outputs that you're seeking for. And reforming yourself is no different, right? You can do all the techniques, right? And kind of the Western mentality is very good at, but sometimes overly focused on the technique, right? If you just get the technique down, then we expect the result to happen, right? But there's something more that's going on there. There is blessing, there is tawfiq, there is success. Okay, so even with reforming yourself, you think that, okay, the technique to reforming myself is to give a lot, right? To be, and that is generosity, right? Or to restrain and refrain from things that belong to other people, or even of the good things of this life. Or it's to not talk, right? To refrain from excess speech, and it's to sleep a little bit and to do this, right? These are all means, that's true. These are all means. The ulama have talked about them a lot. But none of them are going to hit the mark and actually cause what you're looking for, except with Allah's tawfiq, with Allah's will. Today, Raghib Asfahani, he gets into something slightly different. Okay, now that we've kind of put out the map, put all the blessings on the table and looked at them with a lens of what category they might fall into. Now he's going to zero in on one of those categories, specifically the blessings of the soul, meaning virtue, and talk about how each of them is dependent on the other, and how strengthening one usually leads to strengthening the other. Recall that when it came to virtue, Raghib al-Asfahani conceives of virtue as coming from three capacities, right? He says that the human being has been given three capacities. If we develop and train these three capacities into what they're supposed to be, that's virtue. If they swing to either extreme, the left or the right, that's vice. So the three capacities that we had an intellect, we had urge or impulse, and we had anger. Those are the three capacities Allah has given us. And as a refresher, Raghib al-Asfahani said, if we take our intellect and we develop it the way that Allah wants, it leads to wisdom. Whereas if we misuse it, it can either turn into ignorance or it can turn into cunning, right? Deceit, arrogance. We have our capacity of urge, impulse for food, for intimacy. And if we develop and refine it, it will lead to restraint and generosity. If we go to one extreme, it will land us in gluttony, where we become insatiable. We want more and more and more. And the opposite extreme to that is that we become numb to it, so that we don't even appreciate any of it that we do have. And then finally, the last capacity was anger. You could also translate it as zeal, maybe. If we develop it, it becomes a mechanism for justice and for bravery. Whereas if we overindulge, it becomes oppression. If we underindulge, it becomes cowardice. So these were the sort of capacities, and that's Raghib Asfahani's whole mind map of virtue and vice. So he's saying now that each of these virtues depends upon, or we should say is enhanced by, the development of the others, right? So you might find some lopsided people out there, right? Maybe somebody has developed their intellect very far to a high level, but their anger or their zeal is very undeveloped. And so if you end up lopsided like this, then that's holding back even your intellect from being developed to the utmost, right? If you neglect any one of these three categories, it's going to affect the remaining ones. So he gives some examples. He says that when you develop your intellect, you see things for how they really are. You've attained not just knowledge, but also wisdom. You know how to apply it. You will increase in restraint and generosity, right? The second virtue. Because you will realize what's in your true interest at the end of the day, okay? There's kind of a false assumption or a lapse of our intellect when we withhold something from somebody else, okay? Well, let's give a real simple example. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that charity does not decrease your wealth. No, it increases it. Why would he have to say this? Because the materialistic assumption, what we're able to only observe is that charity decreases our wealth, right? So when we have our possessions, and we have enough, alhamdulillah, no one's dying, and somebody else, our brother, our sister in faith, or any other human being is in need, or any other creature, not just human being, is in need, we face a moral decision whether to give from that thing that we love or whether to withhold it and keep it ours. If we withhold it and keep it for ourselves, this is a lack of intellect. It's exposing a chink, a shortcoming in our intellect. Why? Because we're imagining that giving it away is actually going to decrease what's ours. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us by way of his last messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that not only is it not going to decrease from what we have, it's actually going to increase it, both in this life and in the afterlife. So if somebody were really an intelligent person, what would they pursue? Which action would they take? Would they keep it for themselves? No. The reality is that that is an illusion. They're under the illusion that they are gaining something by keeping it with themselves. Whereas an intellect that is advanced beyond that realizes that you're actually going to get more both in this life and the next life from giving. And so we see how the development of the intellect has developed restraint and generosity. Right? People who are stuck with a short-sighted worldview that only think that or only believe in what they can observe, right? They're stuck at a lower level of development. They won't be able to see this or apply it. They will think, they will have the scarcity mindset, something we've talked about a lot in this class. They will really think that there's only so much to go around. They will really actually think that Allah cannot bless things. Or at least they'll act like it, even if asked and they deny it. Just like that, the person who develops their intellect will also develop their justice, their sense of justice, or their practice of justice, and their bravery. The person with a limited intellect, when they see someone being oppressed, they see someone being wronged, they think that it doesn't affect them. They think, well, at least it's not me. Either on an individualistic way or on the level of group identities, right? We have that famous kind of quote that people have been using a lot in the last 5 years here in the States, right? They said that they were coming for this in this group, and so we let them. And then they said they were coming for that group, and we said, well, it's not us, let them. Until there's no one else left except for our group. The quote is a little bit more, rolls off the tongue a little bit better than that, but that's the gist of the quote. The limited intellect can't see past our own either material or in-group interest. Whereas if the intellect is developed the way Allah wants you to develop it, to the point of wisdom, you understand that a rupture in justice in society affects everybody the same. Once the principle has been, or the precedent has been established that this sort of behavior is okay, then everybody else is then entitled to use that behavior or that tactic or that strategy for whatever ends that they want. Look at what happened at the Capitol building earlier this month, right? Only a short-sighted person that's only concerned with their policy, what specific policies they want to see enacted in government would approve of such behavior. A person with more developed, exactly, yes, you guys always come with the quotes, mashallah. Injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. MLK, and it's timely, mashallah. 100%, we see it. That's what Raghib Asfahani is telling us. Didn't Allah say in Surah Al-Ma'idah that if you killed one soul, it's as if you've killed everybody? Without right, of course. Why is that? Because if one soul dies, safety, security, tranquility, trust is gone from that community. You can't let your kids play outside. You can't go in that neighborhood at night. You're afraid of getting robbed. You're afraid of getting stabbed. You're afraid of getting shot up, catching a bullet. One person is dead, it affects everybody. Injustice affects one person, it affects everybody. One group thinks it's okay to resort to violence, to cut through the line, to the front of the line, to use a shortcut to get what they want. That means everybody's going to think that that's okay to do what they want for themselves. Now it's just whoever's got the most weapons. The developed intellect realizes, no. There has to be reciprocity, right? If somebody violates justice, then that affects all of us. Now our ability to institute justice is compromised. Now safety is gone. Now tranquility is gone until it is restored. So the developed intellect will give everyone their due rights. They won't have such a short-sighted vision to only want to get away with something for themselves, either, as we said, on the individual or the group level. They won't play dirty. They know that they have to play fair. And they will adhere to those principles rather than ends justify the means. And so, developing the intellect, we see how it aids and assists the development of those other two virtues. Similarly, if we develop our bravery, right, the capacity for anger, we've taken it to its logical conclusion. We've refined it and honed it until it becomes bravery at the individual level and justice on the level of society. This will help us develop our restraint. Being brave and being just insulates someone against their impermissible lusts and desires. This is the response of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Somebody came to him and said, basically, I really want to fornicate with this one person. And he was he was in the grip of the devil. Like he wasn't in his right mind. The Prophet ﷺ, what did he say to him? He said, what if it was your mother? Meaning the woman. What if it was your sister? And he kept going with his female relatives until the man was able to calm down. Right? He was using the man's sense of justice and bravery when it came to his own family to enhance his restraints when it came to his own self and his own desires and his own lusts. If you're brave, you're okay with cutting against the grain, being part of a counterculture. We have too much of this in the US, and I'm sure probably in the UK as well, where we're so concerned with fitting in. We're so concerned with being accepted. There's a degree of being accepted which is praiseworthy, and there's a degree of being accepted which is too far, right? In the United States, you have the luxury and freedom to develop your own counterculture, right? We have, in high school, you have countercultures according to music tastes, right? You have the grunge crew, you have the punks, you have, this, and they all have their different way of dressing. They all have their different hairstyles and their different lingo and the different things that they do. And everyone's fine with it. It takes bravery and courage to live in a way that's different. And Muslims should avail themselves of that courage to live in a way that's different when it comes to the things in our faith that we should not be compromising on. We should have our own counterculture and lean into that. Certain ideological movements and identities have a pride parade. Where's our pride parade? They have made an entire, whether you agree with a parade or not, that's a whole different thing. But the idea behind the technology of the parade is that they have realized that they have this freedom to have a counterculture. And they have leaned into that and used it to its full extent. We have the same freedom. No one's going to send us back somewhere or do something else to us if we decide to live within our counterculture. They aren't accused of being a fifth column, of being against the government or something, and neither will we at the end of the day, inshallah. Developing your bravery, in addition to developing your restraint, because it takes bravery to resist the temptations that we have in our society. Everybody, I'm sure high school has only gotten worse since I was in high school, right? If you didn't have a girlfriend as a young man in high school, you were bullied and you were made fun of and you were mocked along certain lines. Your orientation was questioned. Your masculinity was questioned, right? And I'm sure that things were going on for women that I wasn't privy to because I wasn't in those circles, right? So it takes bravery to stand up for something. It takes bravery to live according to a different code, a different system of ethics. So developing our bravery will help us with all of that. Developing our bravery will also increase our generosity. Yes. What does Allah say in Surah Al-Baqarah? That the devil, يَعِدُكُمْ بِالْفَقْرَ. يَعِدُكُمُ الْفَقْرَ, that he threatens you with poverty. Literally, he promises you poverty in order to get you to sin. He dangles the thing. There's either fear of something or love of something. That's how the devil works. He either takes your fear of something and he dangles it in front of you and taunts you with it until he gets you to sin. Or he takes your love of something and he tempts you with it and tempts you with it until he gets you to sin. So it takes bravery to not fear. To not fear that poverty or loss of status or loss of reputation or whatever else the devil is threatening you with. Well, if you do this, then what are people going to say? Well, if you don't sell alcohol, then it's going to cut into your bottom line. Well, if you give this away, there's not going to be enough for you and your family and your kids. Your kids need to go to school and go to college and all of this and that and the third. This is why even rich people in the United States don't have any money. They don't have disposable income normally. They have it all tied up with things, right? If you make $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 a year, there's always something more to tie it up in. There's always a better kindergarten to send your kid to. There's always a more elite preschool now these days to send your kid to. And the devil's going to be there threatening you. Oh, don't you want a good future for your childhood? Don't you want them to have better than what you have? Don't you want to set them up for success? The devil will take those things that you fear and will try to provoke you. It takes bravery and courage in order to not fear those things, to not fear poverty. This is one of my favorite hadith when Abu Huraira, who was Ahl Sufa, right, was one of the people of the bench, and they were poor. They were dirt poor. They didn't have anything. And they were very, very hungry one day. They literally only ate when the Prophet ﷺ received, someone gave him some charity. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't eat from charity. And so he brought it and gave it away to Ahl Sufa. One day, the Prophet ﷺ, he was given a bowl of milk. And Abu Huraira came and he gave it to Abu Huraira. And he said to Abu Huraira, take it and go to the masjid and let everyone drink from it first, and then you can drink from it. I love this story so much because I can just feel how Abu Huraira must have felt walking to the masjid. He's got to be looking at this bowl and thinking, man, I'm not going to get any. There's no way that it's going to go that far. How many people are in the masjid? Like, all of us experience this thing, sometime or other. But he fights his nafs and he does it, and he goes to the masjid and he gives the first guy, and the first guy drinks and drinks and drinks and drinks, and Abu Huraira's got to be just like, oh my God, like there's not going to be any left. But then he gets it back and it's still full, the same amount. And then he passes it to the next person and the same thing. He drinks and drinks and drinks until he can't drink anymore. And he gets it back and it's still full. It hasn't decreased at all. And then it makes all the rounds. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ comes in right as Abu Huraira is about to drink. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, drink, Abu Huraira. And he starts to drink. And then he stops. And he looks down, it's still full. And he says, drink again, Abu Huraira. And he says it 3 times to Abu Huraira until he has drunken as much as he's stuffed. He can't drink anymore. And the Prophet ﷺ laughed. He laughed. Because of the blessing. Because of the bravery that it takes to not fear poverty. Right? Abu Huraira was, he was afraid of it. But he fought against it. He had the bravery. And so look at what happened in the end. This is also why the Prophet ﷺ, he compared fighting your nafs to jihad. And he said in some narrations that there's some difference of opinion as to how authentic they are, but the meaning is very accurate, that the greater jihad is against your own self, right? Because it's much easier to apply a certain technique, swing the sword, kill the enemy, battle tactics, line up here, sweep around the flank, all these sorts of things, than it is to control your own urges, than it is to fight against your own fears, than it is to deprive yourself of the things that you love, right? To give them away to other people in their time of need, and sometimes even when you need it. So these virtues, right? These three things: the wisdom, the bravery and justice, the restraint and generosity. We see now how this is real liberation, right? We live in a society, and I don't know if the discourse that swirls around the UK, because we have a sister with us from the UK, is the same as in the United States. But in the United States, our political and social discourse is all about freedom all the time. Whether it's the right wing or the left wing, the right wing says, that it's all about freedom. The left wing says it's all about liberation, and so on and so forth. Freedom is the currency, right? Nobody can be against freedom. They would look at you like you're crazy. Like, what are you talking about? You're against freedom. You're against liberation. And yet, despite all the lip service that we give freedom and liberation in the United States, people are so deeply enslaved by their nefs. They are so completely captive, held for ransom by the things that they love and their conveniences, their comforts, and by the things that they're afraid of. It's almost like an open air prison, right? People imagine that they're the most free people in perhaps the world. They imagine that things elsewhere are really scary and not free. But the actual lived reality is that if you don't develop these virtues based in belief with Allah, or belief in Allah, you have no freedom and you have no liberation. And we see how Islam is the only true liberation and the only true freedom. When you've developed your intellect to understand what's in your actual self-interest, we're talking long-term afterlife self-interest, as opposed to what's just a quick buck, as we say. When you've developed your restraint and your generosity, so that you're no longer thrown into an emotional fit if you don't get the thing that you want, the thing that even you're used to having every day. We run up against this in Ramadan every year. That's why Ramadan is a school. Our coffee, guilty, right? Our three square meals a day, whatever we're used to, we get really grumpy if you take that away from us, right? It's an exercise to break the chains, to show us what we really need and what we don't really actually need. The bravery and the justice, this is setting you free, liberating you from other people's expectations, this groupthink, this kind of dystopia that we live in now, where everybody thinks that they're so unique and individual. They're such a unique individual, but really everybody's kind of the same. Right? Islam is actually, if you develop these virtues within the context of belief in Allah, you're setting yourself free from all of that groupthink. You're enabling yourself to look at reality as it really is and benefits yourself in this life and in the next. That takes us just about to the end of our time. We don't really have enough to get into the next chapter. Does anybody have any other reflections on this or questions or? Ameen wa iyyakum. Ameen wa iyyakum. Okay. If there's nothing else, astaudirukumullah. May Allah safeguard and safe keep all of you and bless you, inshallah. And we'll see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.